Well, welcome everyone. I hope you can hear everything okay. Eric, I know you're listening in the other room, so if something's going wrong, feel free to interrupt and let me know. First of all, I think I'm going to throw something in chat here. If you have a YouTube account, thanks, Eric, and want to throw something into the chat, let me know. That's probably how we'll handle things like questions if things come up that you want to discuss further. So here, I'll start it off. And yeah, feel free to share in the comment section. That's probably how I'll, the only way I'll really be able to interact, but hopefully that'll work fine. This is all very new. This is the first YouTube live stream I've ever done. So it'll be a minor miracle if everything goes off without a hitch. One of the fun things about this is that when I do something, you see it about 10 to 15 seconds later. So there's this weird delay between what I do and any reaction that I'm going to get. But in any case, I'm glad you're here. If you do hear something like weird with the sound, feel free to do that. You'll be hearing sound both from me through the mic as well as on my computer, where I'll be sharing some YouTube videos as well. So yeah, it should be fun. See if I can maybe not be quite so much of a disembodied head here. Yeah, let's dive in. So welcome again. This is the first of our previews this year, first of our 2020 previews for the Great Falls Symphony for our season unlike any other, but in a good way. As many of you know, we've made all of our programs this year free, and that's going to be really exciting, I think. And it's just a way of, you know, dealing with some of the uncertainty if we're selling lots of tickets and things like that. It sort of forces our hand in ways that are a little bit strange. You know, we're going to be asking people to part with their money and then cancel a concert if we have to or something like that. We don't want to find ourselves in that situation. And also, if this results in people coming to check us out who might not otherwise have, that's even better. And the other thing that we're doing, of course, that we haven't done in the past is we're having 2 concerts. So we'll have a 3 o'clock show on Saturday, as well as a 7:30 show with socially distanced audience of about 200 people, and a socially distanced orchestra. And in this case, it'll be all string players, so that we can have us all wearing masks and spread out as much on stage as we possibly can. About 30 of us will be performing. And that way, you know, as again, we get used to all these things that are completely unusual for us, that'll allow us to kind of work out some of what inevitably will have some kinks. And again, it's just going to be one sort of wild kind of adventure. So in any case, hope you really like the performance this weekend. It should be a lot of fun. We're doing 4 pieces and 4 very different pieces. These are 4 pieces just for strings, as I say, except for one that has a little tambourine and triangle, which are all written by Black composers. And you know, the reason to do that is very simply to make it clear that, you know, the Western classical musical tradition has always had Black musicians as part of it. And it's very easy, I think, to kind of not have that impression if we don't play music by Black musicians. So I think it's, you know, it's not going to change the world in a huge way, but if we can correct at least a little bit of these misconceptions, that's a good thing. It was very important to me putting together the program that we didn't pick composers that all sounded exactly the same or came from the same kinds of musical eras or genres and things like that. So we actually have 4 very different composers from different times. And so we're actually going to go in chronological order today as we discuss them each a bit, which is not program order. So we'll actually start with Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. If you watched any of my conductor and quarantine videos, I did a little video about Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, English composer born in 1875, died quite young, 1912, of pneumonia, and he was mixed race. His father was West African, and actually his father was a descendant of American slaves. It's sort of via Canada and back through West Africa a few generations prior. But his father was a doctor, came to London, came to England, and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's mother had an affair or something. I mean, it was not adulterous, but they weren't married, and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was a result of that, and he actually grew up in his mother's family, and his grandfather was really influential, was the one who really supported his musical talent and ambitions. So as a teenager, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor went to Royal College of Music and studied violin as well as composition. His big kind of break, if you want to call it that, would have been in 1898 with his most famous piece called Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, sort of a legendary version of a real person, kind of a telling of the life of this prominent Native American figure. And it's very much part of, it's a work for choir and orchestra and soloists, and it's very much a part of this kind of European classical music tradition. And a lot of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's music is very heavily kind of part of this European romantic tradition. A lot of it sounds very similar to composers like Elgar, but you can hear influences by Dvorak and Wagner and a lot of these very prominent European composers of the late 19th century. He made several trips, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor did, to the United States, and during those trips where he was kind of greeted as this sort of celebrity, he got to know some of the African-American music there as well, and started to incorporate those styles into his works too. But again, a lot of the stuff prior to 1900 is going to be again, very strongly European in its influence and in its style. The 2 pieces that we're going to be playing by Coleridge-Taylor are called Novelettes, and the title Novelette is, again, a very European one. It's probably first used, at least most prominently used, by the German composer Robert Schumann. And a novelette is a pretty undescriptive title for a piece. It doesn't sort of mean a ton. It's got that kind of diminutive at the end, the et, so it's not a huge piece. And but the novel part of it suggests that it tells some kind of story, and it doesn't quite tell what you would consider necessarily a huge narrative in any sense, but it sort of captures a mood or captures a style. And these 4 novelettes that he wrote, again, we're going to be playing 2 of them, each do that really well. They each sort of capture this kind of stylistic moment. We're going to be performing numbers 3 and 4 from the 4 novelettes. These were written right at the end of the 19th century. And the first one that we'll listen to, number 3, is called Waltz. And it is in 3/4 time, as good waltzes are. But it is very unwaltzy. It's much more lyric. It feels like a song. If you're a fan of Wagner, and who isn't, you'll hear perhaps some moments which are remarkably similar to Wagner's opera, Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, the Master Singers of Nuremberg. But if you, by some unfathomable reason, are not a huge fan of Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, I think you're mostly going to be impressed by the sort of melancholy, sort of songful, characterful nature of the music. So let's take a listen. I usually like to have ones where you can see the performers. Unfortunately, my favorite performance on YouTube of this one is just going to be a still image, so you're going to have to use some of your imagination. This is some of our military string musicians actually in this performance. And this is the piece that has some percussion in it as well. So you'll hear some triangle and tambourine. Our only non-string players are here. So let's take a listen. This is Novelette number 3, the very lyric and unwaltzy waltz. As lovely as that is, I'm going to pause it for just a second, just because I want to be sure that people are hearing it. So if somebody can throw into chat, I hear the music, or something along those lines, that would make me feel better about myself. Thanks, Andrea. You'll, of course, hear that very prominent high violin solo that will be performed by our very own Mary Papoulis, who is returning to the orchestra after a year of hanging out doing yoga in California. There's that tambourine. There's the triangle. And again, you can hear how even when it gets into its sort of highest energy, fastest parts, you know, typically for something to be a waltz, you really want to feel it in one. This dun chun chun dun chun chun 1, 2, 3, and this only ever really gets up to something like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where you're still feeling sort of each beat as a separate event, and so it never quite gets that waltz rhythm going. But it is in 3/4, so if you're looking at sort of the bare minimum of what qualifies as a waltz, we can certainly justify it that way. Great, I'll give it a pause right there before we hear the entire thing, and we'll nudge it forward to the next one. The fourth one, very different stylistically. It's a higher energy. It's not quite dancey, although you get a few moments that are like that. To me, it actually stylistically sounds a little bit like early musical theater almost. It's very much in that kind of light music style of the, again, late 19th century, early 20th century. And I think you can already hear in movement 3 the really strong European romantic influence. If you're a fan, again, of people like Dvorak and Elgar, you can definitely hear those influences there. You know, this last movement sounds, again, similar to those composers as well, with maybe just a touch of Arthur Sullivan, if you're a Gilbert and Sullivan fan. But again, it's a very sort of high energy, rhythmic affair. Let's see if I can find the beginning of it here. This part sounds a lot like Dvorak. Cool. I think we'll save the pretty lyrical middle section for Saturday, just in the interest of time, and move on to our next composer chronologically, who is William Grant Still. So if Coleridge-Taylor was born in 1875, William Grant Still was born in 1895. He lived for a long time, unlike Coleridge-Taylor, who died in 1912. William Grant Still lived till 1978, but much of what we sort of know him for or think of him about is in terms of sort of the New York scene in the 20s, 30s, 40s, the kind of Harlem Renaissance-ish kind of era. And William Grant Still, he was born in Arkansas, went to college in Ohio, joined the Navy in World War I, but did spend a sort of important early part of his career in New York, working in theater orchestras, doing arrangements of popular music, and writing lots of concert works. And so a lot of firsts to his name in terms of having works performed by a Black composer by major orchestras, conducting major orchestras, things like that. But even though we think of that part of his life, most of his most famous compositions come from that part of his life. He composed into the 70s and actually spent a large part of sort of the second half of his life in Los Angeles, which is where he died. He did some arranging for film scores while continuing to conduct and write a lot of concert works. The piece that we're including on our program on Saturday is the Danzas of Panama, is what it's called. And it has sort of an odd origin involving a woman named Elizabeth Waldo, who, speaking of long lives, is still alive and still active, apparently. But she was born in 1918, so that would put her at 102. And she was a violinist, and she was a member of this sort of prominent American youth orchestra conducted by Stokowski, and they toured Latin America. And this was a huge influence on her, and she sort of turned into this kind of ethnomusicologist who became very interested in music of Latin America. And in 1948, she had sort of collected some of these Panamanian dance melodies and said, hey, Mr. Still, why don't you take these and adapt them into a piece? And that's exactly what William Grant Still did. So these four Panamanian dances he actually turned into a sort of string quartet version and a string orchestra version. We'll listen to two of them. One of the things I think you'll notice about this, despite any musicologist's best intentions, things tend to get lost in translation. So the first dance that we'll listen to here is this genre called a tamborito, and we'll actually listen to some of this, watch some of this actual dance in progress, see what it looks like kind of on the ground, so to speak. So here's some tamboritos dancers and some of the music. What you'll notice probably when we listen to the Still is all the ways that this does not sound like what Still wrote. But again, these things, there's probably a melody snippet that, that Waldo found. It won't be this one. But the big one that you'll notice when we listen to the Still is the drum, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But let's just watch a little bit of this dance. So, tamborito means little drum. feel free to subscribe. So the call and response is very typical of the dance, and it is often a couples dance. As you see here. So, as I say, when we listen to the still tamborito from these 4 Panamanian dances, I think you'll mostly be struck by how much it doesn't sound like what you just heard. And again, this is something that typically happens, honestly, with music that's influenced by a certain style or adapted from a certain style. Some features make it in and a lot of features don't. So the big ones that you'll basically notice, I think, is that there is that kind of high melody that's happening throughout the still tamborito. Again, it's not this melody, but you might be able to notice some similarities to that. And then the big one is the drum. So still asks the string players to tap their instruments in a hopefully non-destructive way. And you'll be able to hear that right away. This piece is, as I say, it has both string quartet versions and string orchestra versions. I've actually chosen a quartet version. I think this is the one, yeah. Just so you can see that tapping more easily, it'll be pretty obvious. It happens right from the very beginning. And here, I hope you enjoy it. This time you'll actually get to watch some musicians, so visually this should be a little bit more appealing than the last one. I'll start it over. So just to state the obvious, right? This is a piece that has harmonies in it where you have these different parts going on at the same time, and that wasn't happening in the tamborito that we just watched. And you'll hear, again, you saw the tapping. The pizzicato also kind of works as part of the percussion section where they pluck the strings. But the main melody along the top is probably what Elizabeth Waldo showed to still as kind of the sort of main influence, the main kind of structural thing that led to this composition. Lovely. Um, yeah, so again, it doesn't really sound like the original Tamburito. It doesn't make it bad music or anything like that, but again, it is definitely filtered through this lens when it gets kind of transferred into this other genre. Um, the other one of these, there are 4 of these, and we'll do all 4 on Saturday. But I'd like to today only listen to this one. That was the first one, as well as the 4th one, which is called the Cumbia in the Congo. And again, we can check out a little bit of those styles. And I think for time's sake, we'll just actually check out some Congo dancing. Again, you'll notice that there's a melody, people singing this melody, and a really strong sort of percussion and rhythmic profile. And those are the things that are going to be adapted into the piece, a stills piece. Again, the rest of it is not going to sound so similar, but it's worth still taking a look. Congo dancing is one of the most sort of directly influenced by African dancing styles, and it really comes through this kind of slave tradition. So let's take a look. Unfortunately, there are no whistles in the William Grant Still piece. I'll stop it there. And cumbia is another dance style, and still has combined these two. I won't actually show that cumbia video. It's just a little musical snippet anyway. But let's hear William Grant Still's take on the Congo style. Here we go. Again, we'll hear a quartet version of it. And again, you heard the women singing that melody, and you saw lots of percussion happening. And those are really the two things. You'll hear melodies. Again, it's not the same melody that was in that video. And you'll hear a lot of percussive effects, not just the tapping on the instrument, but a lot of even the bow strokes. It's a lot of repeated sort of chicka 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 stuff that's designed to emulate the traditional drums. But again, it's going to be filtered through this kind of more sort of pleasant to American ears, harmonic kind of language, which again doesn't make it bad music, but it does remove it from its origin just a touch. Nice. Well done. Um, yeah, so I think you can hear, when sort of cultures collide, it's a really cool thing. Actually, it's one of the most kind of fruitful musical kinds of events. But if you're used to say what congos sound like in their kind of traditional or original kinds of format, then you're going to hear this and you're mostly going to notice the ways which it doesn't sound like a congo, right? Again, doesn't make it bad music, and in fact, it's one ways that we make great music is to bring these things together, sort of Congo melody slash rhythms kind of adapted to this Western genre of quartet slash string orchestra. Yeah, Andrew, they're pretty good. So great. For time purposes, we should move on. I'm going to unfortunately give the next two composers a little bit of a short shrift here, but our third chronological composer here is Adolphus Hailstork, born in 1941, and he too is still active and writing music. He spent most of his career in the academic world, so grew up in upstate New York, went to big schools and studied with famous people, and taught at a variety of universities. I believe he's at Old Dominion now, or at least that's where he was most recently. The piece we're going to hear by him, the piece that we're going to play on Saturday, is this piece called Sonata da Chiesa, which means church sonata. And what's kind of interesting about that name is that it's a little bit of a pun. A church sonata is actually a Baroque form, so 1700 or so, and chamber music that was played in churches sometimes. This has, as far as I can tell, almost no resemblance to that particular Baroque form, and the composer says that he calls it a church sonata because it literally is inspired by the building of a church, by the actual physical structure itself. And so what you hear in this piece is a lot of these kind of monolithic structures where the whole orchestra is playing the same rhythm at the same time, or very similar ones. And it does give it this kind of massive structural kind of sound. He actually wrote it for a high school group, and must have been a very good high school group because there's a lot of interesting things happening. It's in movements, although all the movements are connected, and each of them are inspired by the each use of Latin phrases that come from Catholic liturgy or Christian poems, things like that, sort of traditional Latin poems related to that religion. And as I say, they're all connected, so they don't have obvious breaks in between them. But generally speaking, it goes fast, slow, slow, fast, slow, slow, fast. We have 7 different units. And the first one is called Exultate, which kind of exult in praise, and which I think you'll hear. So let's take a bit of this very joyful opening movement here. Again, what you'll hear is, in addition to the joy, these sort of massive chord sounds. Again, not much interesting visual information here, I'm afraid, but hopefully your ears will make up for it. And we're coming into the second section here now, which is called O Magnum Mysterium. And it is very mysterious music. You'll hear this violin melody going over the top, which sort of travels in weird directions. Pam, I absolutely agree. It's lovely stuff. This one is definitely a little more otherworldly. If you know the O Magnum Mysterium poem, it's O Great Mystery, where they're talking about the nativity and how how the animals were the first witnesses to the birth of Jesus. And you can hear that even though this is a very different style than the first part, the exultate, we still have a lot of these chords that are kind of moving together. It's this kind of architectural approach to the composition. Now we moved into the adoration. This is the third part, which has a really nice viola solo. The mysterious parts are going to kind of fade away. I'm going to, for time's sake, just give it a nudge to the middle movement. This is the other fast movement. It's called jubilation. Again, you'll get a lot of these chords moving together, but they move so in a much sort of faster, more dancey way. I'm going to stop there again, so we make sure we get to our final composer. I horribly mistreated Hailstork by moving through quickly, but I'm going to horribly mistreat our next composer by moving even more quickly. Jessie Montgomery, born, I don't know exact birth year, around 1980, and she was born in New York, grew up there, studied there, violinist as well as a composer, and really active in the Sphinx organization, which I first became aware of when I was in school at the University of Michigan. The Sphinx organization, what they do is they support Black and Latino classical musicians, and they're based in Detroit. And so when I was at the University of Michigan, they had a lot of their events in Ann Arbor, and so I got to hear their famous orchestra, and they had some of their competition events and things like that, where they're kind of trying to find these sort of young talent and foster it. And Jessie Montgomery has been the composer in residence for that group. The piece of hers we're going to play is called Strum, and I think when you hear it, you'll understand why it's called Strum. There is a lot of strumming. We have a lot of bloody fingers in our orchestra at the end of this one. But what's kind of cool, this is another piece that, like the William Grant Still, is written for both string orchestra and string quartet versions. And Jessie Montgomery being a violinist, and she is part of a string quartet called the Catalyst Quartet, and you know, being I don't know if she's technically a millennial or not, but of course she's much more kind of internet and digital savvy than perhaps some of these older guys are, which means that Strum has a bona fide music video that of her quartet playing the piece. So that's the version that I'd like to watch. And again, what you'll hear mostly, what you'll be struck by is the amount of strumming that happens. It starts with pizzicato, and you'll actually see these kind of not quite guitar-like strums, but there's lots of going over the strings with your fingers in that way. So this will be our last listening for today. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. And and I'll try to throw some answers back at you. The composer is the second one in from the left, playing the second violin part, and you can see the strumming. Confess to not entirely seeing all of the significances with the amusement park, but I'm open to just taking in the artistic vision. I suppose you can hear some of the kind of circular up and down motions of some of these lines as kind of resembling some of the circular up and down motions of some of these amusement park rides. Hopefully those bumper cars aren't a metaphor for our own performance on Saturday. Yeah, Pam, rubato, technically, if we're having a little vocab lesson, literally means stolen, but it refers to where the music kind of slows down and speeds up, where you're not constantly playing the same speed the entire time. Um, the idea being that you steal time from one part of the music and give it to the other part of the music, kind of like that. But when you have this music that's not staying in one pulse the entire time, actually feeling those tempo changes all together is actually a pretty important challenge. And especially that waltz, that third movement, that third novelette. The fourth novelette is pretty straightforward. There are a couple slowdowns and things like that, but that one pretty much chugs along in time. But yeah, that third movement waltz is lots of tempo fluctuations that we need to make sure that we're feeling together. Yeah, Andrea, we miss you too, and I know that you have your reasons for taking some concerts off, but I hope that we'll have you back, and yeah, looking forward to that for sure. Um, well, again, there's a very sort of odd situation here where I can't see people raise their hands, and the kind of back and forth conversation is a little bit more difficult. But um, I'll hang out here for a minute or two. If you have anything again you want to throw my way, again put it in the chat. But if I don't see other comments, then I'll just look forward to either seeing you on Saturday, or yeah, hopefully you can catch the restream when it happens. Thank you, Kim. Yeah, Pam, hopefully conductors aren't entirely useless. But yes, that's one way in which we can help, is if we need to feel tempo changes together. We can act as kind of a focal point that allows us all to do so at the same time. But yeah, again, if you can't catch it live, we'll have the rebroadcast on KRTV, and that'll be a week after the performance. If you're wondering about that, we'll be sending out tons of materials in advance of that, so you won't miss it for sure. That's interesting, Andrea. Not really for me. I don't especially notice it. I make sure I'm talking loud. You'd probably have to ask the performers how they feel about that. I know, having done some Halloween concerts where I've conducted with like a Darth Vader helmet, that just weirds people out. But I think it does help to actually see my eyes. There's a lot of communication that happens through there, not just sort of like the shape of your mouth and things like that. So honestly, the biggest thing is that it's a little bit hot, so I sweat a little bit more than I usually do, which is already a fair amount. And there's this weird tendency to sort of inhale too much, and you get like a mouthful of mask. But yeah, generally from my end, it's not so weird. Well, Andrea, I'm sure we could make that happen at some point. We need an occasion, of course. It's actually weird those Darth Vader masks they're really heavy, because you have to get the ones that go all the way to the back, because you're being seen from behind by the audience. So you can't just get the sort of cheap front mask. You have to get the thing that goes entirely over your head, which is either really expensive. I actually had to rent mine when I did that. And that was actually one of the more adventurous concerts I've ever given. It was a Halloween concert. And the thing about that mask is that it's very heavy and it is not very stable. So I couldn't really move. If I did, it would have fallen off. So I had to stand very still. Plus, I was wearing like Darth Vader gloves, which actually were very slippery, which means I couldn't turn pages, the scores. And the Darth Vader mask has these, these sort of lens-ish kinds of things, which I don't know in the real movie how productive those things were, but this mask, which I'm sure had been rented by a ton of people and bounced around a lot, they're actually pretty distorted. So I couldn't see. I couldn't turn pages, I couldn't really move. I basically walked out on stage and had to conduct while standing pretty still, and having to do everything from memory, even though I had no plans to do it from memory. And yeah, that was actually it was fun, but it was, yeah, let's just say it was a higher degree of difficulty than some other performances I've had. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Um, and yeah, hope to see you soon. And hopefully, we'll have another great a live stream when the time comes in November. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.